Blog Talk Radio.
We are the last generation. It's time for this conflict to end. It's time for us to understand who and what we are as beings of people. The original indigenous beings of North America. There are more so-called black men in prison today than were enslaved in 1850. And for over 100 years, it's been talked about movements that took you nowhere, near the claim of freedom, leaders that promised independence from a system of war that is meant to genocide us all off the face of this earth. Movements that have been destroyed, our leaders killed, and a war that has been raging on since and before 1492. Towards the carbon-based beings of this world, of this North America, of you. Now it is time to bring this conflict to an end. For those in the memory that gave their lives in the defense of our civilizations, revolt after revolt, those have been slaughtered and killed as a part of this war. Everyone knows something has to change. So we will rise and become who we are truly designed to be. Original indigenous beings of the Bronze Race. Out of the ashes, we will reform a civilization that was set for dead. The civilization of the indigenous beings of North America.
That is consumed and committed to our total destruction. An enemy that demands to be fought, and we will fight. But I say to you, our greatest challenge is not the might of a Klingon fleet. The greatest challenge laying before us is to do what must be done without undoing the dream of the Federation. For myself, I have but one fear: destroying the dream of the Federation. Compared to such a loss, I do not fear the Klingon Empire.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable people, to see if we could become something more. So when they needed us, we could fight the battles
that they never could.
Feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail all the same. Dread it, run from it, destiny still arrives.
There's been an awakening. Have you felt it? You are listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Where you may be in this beautiful world, today on Dark Matter Radio, we have a wonderful show, and it is going to be about the letter return of the American Aboriginal Indians in the white paper with Dr. Tate. We call her Chief Blue Feather, and we're going to have her on the show right away. Just let me give a short introduction about Chief Blue Feather, and she can come in and she can begin to start saying a lot more about herself. But one of the things that they have is that we at Coosa Nation has taken action concerning human rights violations against North American Aborigines, reclassified as Indians, coloreds, mulattoes, Negroes, Afro-Americans, Black Americans, lastly, African Americans, as a result of Euro-American colonialism. We submit North America Aborigines, or Aboriginals, have been denied the most basic rights of self-identification through forced reclassification, miseducation. We are rising public awareness about the injury of ethnic genocide committed against the Native North Americans, Aborigines, due to colonial occupations of our motherland. And I do not want to hesitate at all. Chief Blue Feather, are you there?
Osio, Halito, I am here.
Good. Osio. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, enjoying Sunali and just having some peace today, some peace and quiet, and looking forward to our interview today.
Nice. We're going to be discussing quite a few things today, but one of the most important things is that I want to give you a chance to really introduce yourself to the audience of who you are and how you really got into a lot of the things you got into. So, who are you?
Well, I give honor and respect to my ancestors and to my mother and father. My father, James Lawson, the Great Eagle, and to my mother and matriarch, Anita, our beloved woman. And that started there. I give respect and shout out to my husband, Eagle Eye, and to my children. I have 4 children who have children. So I have about 6 grandchildren now. And I'm very honored to be in their lives and being a part of their education and, allowing new generations within the knowledge of self and being spiritually connected to their planet, to their motherland. And I've been an educator in public schools for over 20 years. I retired from that or left that field of work in 2016 when I completed my doctoral studies at Walden University. And from that point on, I was actually directed in the field of working with organizations, or I was pursuing to work with organizations to decriminalize children in schools. That was a big part of my just looking at how families were affected by their children being criminalized at school for youth behaviors and being caught between, state agencies, the courts, and the schools. And that's what I was actually headed in that direction, postgraduate study. And here I am today, using my background, knowledge, and expertise and advocating for rights for Indigenous people across the country. So a lot happened post-school, and I was redirected, I believe, by the ancestors, just to look at holistically from an Indigenous standpoint. A lot of my doctoral work was looking at education, the prison system, healthcare system, and just, the basic inequalities that we, as so-called people of color, the reclassifications of our people as Black, Afro-American, looking at systems and how they work and how they don't work for us, even when we have achieved certain, educational levels and, career levels, making certain money annually. But for the whole of us, it doesn't do anything or hasn't done anything. We haven't seen any type of real systematic change for the Aboriginal American throughout these systems. And we're supposed to be more nuanced. We're supposed to be more contemporary. We're supposed to be, more humane, but yet we still linger. We still remain the highest number of people or persons in the population that are over-incarcerated within the United States carceral system. The United States remains the #1 human traffickers through mass incarcerations, which mostly are made up of our people. So when you put it in that perspective, that kind of opens up a whole new lane of advocacy, because it's not looking at us from the false narrative that millions of us were brought over here in slave ships, and the reason why we can't get it together, we're not pulling up our bootstraps. All the antiquated, stereotypical conversations around who we are, they're false. They don't work. It's not because we can't pull up our bootstraps. It's because as Aboriginal people, we are constantly sought after. We are constantly hunted, literally hunted by this system through school, walking on the street, in the medical field. And we already know through the so-called weaponized judicial system. So pulling that all together, and my heart was moved in that direction. And then from that point on, I've been 100% dedicated to illuminating these atrocities and the actual crime of genocide. And unfortunately, a lot of our people in the world does not look at us as victims of genocide because of the false narratives that are perpetrated in educational circles and in the mainstream. But we are the victims of actually a continuum of genocide, just for the fact of pretending we're somebody else, as opposed to the actual people of the land.
Yeah, so let's just unpack that just a little bit. When you say that this pretending that we're somebody else, and that the way that the educational system has portrayed us, what exactly does that mean?
Well, we're all victims of academic fraud. Whatever walk of life you are, if you're going through the public educational system, and I've been in the public educational system for many years. Like I said, I walked away from that in 2016 with the idea of, moving us forward in this vein of advocacy. That first, there's so many historical untruths and falsities that we have to unpack and deal with. It's just a lot. It's cumbersome. Because first of all, we have to deal with the academic fraud and historical fraud about the history of America. So that's where it kind of starts there, right? The geographical fraud, or the geological fraud that this is a new land. It was, just put together by, foreigners and colonists, and that we know that is farthest from the truth. Not speaking truthfully and honestly about the civilization, the vibrant, high society that America and her people were already engaged in prior to colonization and intrusion upon our land. So we're dealing with that issue of just, they're still teaching children that America was named after Amerigo Vespucci. Like, that is totally false. So that it's that piece. So once you disconnect and you lie about the land, so now, the lie about the people becomes easier. So you've created this narrative of so-called these allegedly Native Americans running around, they're half naked, they're not civilized, right? So it's easy to kill off a population, allegedly, of people who were not really civilized, who weren't, how they teach in school, they're just loose bands of clans and tribes that, just kind of roamed freely across the land. So it's easy to usurp them, easy to take the land and kill them off, basically. That's what you teach children. Most of the American Indians were killed or died off. Then the children learn, or, from elementary school all the way up, that the presence of so-called black people here is because they were brought here on these slave ships, millions of them, and we are the diaspora of Africa. So in other words, we never belonged here.
Yeah.
So when you put all that together in a big cauldron, the only soup that comes out of that pot is fraud. But it's a very profound fraud upon a people who remain disenfranchised in the system by political parties in every facet of life, because you're lying about who we are. And that in and of itself is genocide, because you're wiping away the genetic memory of a people who are the actual Aboriginal people of the land, which also takes away our universal divine connection to this land, because the average of our people believe this is the land of the KKK, this is the land of our enslavement. This is not a country for us. It's not our country. So you take away the investment that Aboriginal people has in their own homeland, where we care about, first of all, we care about each other as original people. We care about our generations and the things that they will be able to hold on to, pass on to their generations. You're taking away our connection to nature all around us, because we're forced into thinking we're from somewhere else. So we don't put those investments, those spiritual investments, we don't put our academic investments, our life investments in building where we are and respecting where our feet touches the soil, because we're told we're from somewhere else. So that in of itself is a crime, right, against our humanity.
One of the questions is that how, I mean, you got your strong start in education, great family values. How were you able to plug in to where you are now? How are you able to get over the veil of this education political system that is just spewing so much atrocities that are lies about the people that are truly indigenous to the Americas?
Well, one, I have to say, from my own parents educating me in who we were. I mean, we always grew up, my brothers and I always grew up with knowing or being told by our parents that we were Indians. You know, Cherokee on my mom's side, my dad are Virginia Indians. You know, my father and my mother both shared oral histories of, you know, elders in the families that they have spoken with. So my father, you know, the Lawsons, the Smiths, the Browns, the Shacklefords, the Patterson's Hills, you know, all from the Virginia Indian Territories. And my mother family is from very strong Cherokee roots, North Carolina and Georgia. You know, the Fridays, the Wilsons, the Hortons, the Williams, the Houstons, you know, these are our people. And actually having that foundation, even though we were taught different things in school, that always stayed in the back of our mind. So it just happened to be some years prior to me actually, you know, we moved back down to the South. My husband and I and our children actually left the North and came back to the South in 2000, early 2000. And that is, I think, when I had a personal spiritual reawakening. Stories that my parents used to tell us, and then I started having more conversations with my mom. You know, unfortunately, at that time, my dad had already passed away. I started speaking with elder matriarchs in our family. Mary Lee, who has passed on to ancestors, you know, shared with me that we were our family was a part of the Powhatan Confederacy, and I've seen rolls, you know, the Cherokee Powhatan rolls, like all of our folk surnames are all listed on those rolls. Reconnecting with the historical stories that my mom would share from her great aunt, Flo, who was blind, and then my aunt, my mother's sister, started doing some research and ancestry, and my mom started floating pictures to me. I have a beautiful picture of one of our great aunties who was known to, you know, maintain her Cherokee garb and wear her Indian garb. I remember aunts in my family who, in fact, my aunt Mary Lee on my dad's side, who I used to wonder, she always dressed like an Indian, like she had, you know, the way she wore her hair, her garb, fringes, and headbands and things. So I can remember, you know, elders, at least two elders that, look different. They still dress dark. And it's funny, my mom told me the same story. Our beloved woman told the same story when she was younger, remembering, how at the passing of her grandmother, my great-grandmother, there was a relative of the brother-in-law who came in full Cherokee garb, breastplate, all feathered down, to pay homage for her passing. So these stories, we just started building on those stories more, going to our genealogy, remembering those stories, and that's where the foundation of, I would say a reawakening, and then coming here and, I started hearing whisperings of mother tongue and, connecting with other individuals online and people, and just, listening to stories and saying, hey, and being redirected in history, and, a lot of real American history was, being brought out, on the underground and online and stuff like that. Just started putting pieces together of that, and that's what kind of put me, and I've always had a very big heart, including my children and my family. We've always had a big heart for people, especially children and families. We've done a lot of advocacy work in the state of Georgia, just through schools, mentoring programs, free summer camps at our home or within the, place within the community. We're old school. We go and visit, families and of children who may have been struggling, in school, and just reaching out, and giving those type of free programs in the community. So we're kind of known for that. But once we started to float more into our indigenousness and relearning our history and putting pieces together of our own genealogy, it just kind of exploded. So 2016, I would say, is kind of like that pivotal point where it just kind of exploded, where, I started, to meet other chiefs and be finding myself in circles with other families and other individuals that seemed to have had the heart to do the same thing and to help our people wake up and make those connections and tell the truth about who we are. And then we kind of got to the and the advocacy piece just kind of flowed naturally, and that grew out of our school connection as well, because my daughter, who was actually our chieftess of administration, and our children always have kind of worked with me in programs that we've done. So we're pretty known in the community that we live here in Georgia for that anyway. So we've always had that kind of heart to help people. So when we started to connect with other individuals who like mine who want to do that, and then we finally, we formed a council, and we began working under the banner of Coosa Nation around the end of 2016, going into 2017. My home was dedicated to being a resource for people. I actually became an embassy and a headquarters where people were able to come for services and educational resources, helping people to connect in genealogy. And then the advocacy piece, like I said, extended out of my work within the community and within schools. It just kind of flowed naturally into advocacy of someone gotten arrested, my children were taken, or I was discriminated against, in this situation, or I have a health issue and I'm not getting the services. So it just kind of happened naturally. And I do have to say, I give honor to our Judiciary Council, the Council of Nine, and to our great council. Yeah,
we'll get into that, because it's really important for everybody to understand that how you're explaining this is that strong family ties from one generation to another generation, giving oral records, even written records, is extremely important in how information comes about in terms of who and what you are as being of people, and what your family background is all about, and that the normal societal education gave you absolutely none of that. So most of your education in terms of who you are as a being came from family, and that's very important for people to understand, because the educational system that we're in now, which you're you have a strong knowledge of where you began, puts a separation in place where family can no longer really give their roots to their children by forcing the mother and father out of the home and bringing them into daycare, kindergarten, then on up. And thinking about that, and your advocacy work, is this how you had started the concepts of developing an indigenous Aboriginal American Indian school?
Yes. When I was completing my doctoral work, I was in a doctoral program where I was mentored. So I didn't have like regular classes. Like I did have research classes, but the majority, 80 to 90% of my doctoral work is research and action research, things that I had to research, looking at past theories, looking at up-to-date problems and issues, and then an application of how does that apply today. So the work that I did doing my dissertation work that I created out of my applications of CAM work that I did and brought free mentoring programs to my community, which involved, my family being part of that, being those extra hand resources to help families with, reading, bringing a whole literacy program to our, a very nouveau, out of the box, reading literacy program to my community, bringing, connecting healthcare system with the children in school. We had school health fairs. So all these things grew out of my doctoral work, but I actually physically did these things and brought these type of programs to the community. So one of my dreams when I decided to go back to even get, to work, do my doctoral work, was to have my own school. That is something that has always been of my list of creating a program where children specifically with that were struggling in school and children with special needs can have a type of program where, they're treated like they're regular people. It's just that they may have a certain learning curve and may need extra learning support. But I found that, the children, the so-called misfit children, or the children that, society targets as being bad or being unteachable, I found such beautiful gems in children that were earmarked for pretty much failure. And I found that if you apply love, care, tough love, resources, connecting with their families and really being there with them in an honest way, you can bring out the best in these children. And that was what kind of pushed us into, that was one of the goals that I, did have, that I did want to have my own school. So when COVID hit, I just heard the whispering of the ancestors, it's time to start your school. And by that time, we were fully immersed in, reconnecting to our indigenous roots, and thus Budding Star Seed, Buta Suna Academy, which means Budding Star Seed, was born. And it started with the children right where we're at, my own nieces and nephews, my own grandchildren. That was our first class, and then we extended the service by creating a Friday school online so that we could connect with other homeschooling parents to be a support to help them with curriculum, with, being organized and to, run their homeschool program for their children. And we just started, and that's how we started. And we did a free, we started to give out free resources. We have an awesome council that helps support providing curriculum books and giving, little laptops and other. Our chief mother has been a big help in that, paying for our subscriptions, educational subscriptions, and that's how it began. And then more people started to learn about it. So it's like we pick up new families each year. This is our 4th year going strong, and we're getting stronger each year with our base. And I can tell you, our children, they're just awesome. I'm so blessed to be able to sit here and be a guide, I'm so honored that we can be a guide in their life just to help bring out the beautiful light that these children have. I mean, their critical thinking skills are off the chain. And this is what I've been waiting for. Like, they need a free space to be free, and we can talk about, there's no topic that we can't really talk about, and we really deep dive into the nature sciences as the way they should be taught. And their critical thinking skills in their math skills. We do a lot of STEM projects, a lot of nature path projects, right capacity. So it's pretty deep, and I'm very honored to be able to have that school program. So we're on our 4th year.
Nice. And I just want everybody to know that this is actually a bona fide school that operates and provides services around the continental United States. There's people from many different nations, tribes, however you want to describe them, that actually go to the school, and people are actually homeschooling their children outside of the educational system, and within the system that we're in now, they're actually getting accredited for actually being educated. So this is real. This is real, and this is one of the reasons why I really needed Dr. Tate to come on, Chief Booth Leather, in order for her to be able to get into the type of services that are being offered in a system that doesn't really care about your children, and it doesn't really care about you either. And the type of education that they're giving them, they're teaching them a land. Is that not right? I mean, they're teaching them about what water is, earth, the trees. It's an educational system that actually gets in to who and what they are as real beings of people, giving them a sense of real purpose of self. Am I saying that right?
Absolutely. Yes, we deep dive into the sacred geometry, matri. We really deep dive into sacred geometry, and we learn. I guide the children into the mother tongue. So we actually look at names of places where they're at. We do a lot of projects that wherever the children are is sacred ground, right? So they do projects where they have to learn the flora and the fauna of their community. What type of ancient monuments do you have in your community? What are some things that are going on in your community? What are the names of places and spaces in your community? So they've been able to see how majority, not the minority, the majority of named spaces throughout the United States still have roots of our language. So we're able to say those words and break them down and what they mean, because our language is a living frequency, right? And every space and place that has roots of the mother tongue is always a place of life and breathing and reflection and in the image of the Great Mother. So they get that experience. We do a lot of health, connecting health to nature, the type of plants and the type of plants that are good for certain body organs and things like. We're really heavy into the human body, into our, into yourself, not in an ego selfish way, but the word self, take the S and put the C back on it. You're saying yourself, your cells. So we're learning how to love yourself, because you are a part of the symbiotic relationship with all that is alive around you, and everywhere you step and touch, it's your ancestors, your brothers and sisters, the soil, the soul that you walk on, the sun, the suna, the water, the great wa, the great hawa, the expanse, the rocks. Those are living organisms. But when we're in public education, they teach you the sun, the water, and rocks are non-living. Not possible. How can it be non-living? Right? How can it be non-living? You can't live without it, right? So we're learning.
That's why I wanted to get into this, because you're also talking about the mother tongue, which you guys get into, about the original language of the actual indigenous people of the Americas, which were reclassified as African Americans, Black, etc. And and when you get into all of that, you're talking about the school system actually participating in the genocide of a whole entire, not only a culture, but a whole entire civilization that was once here, that they're just wiping underneath the rug. And that's why the white paper is so important. And if you can just briefly explain how all of that you were doing in all your services led to what we call the white paper, and what is the purpose of the white paper?
Well, we're creating our curriculum in real time, right? Because we don't go to, we don't rely on the so-called Native American perspective of our own history. So we don't copy we don't take that avenue when we're working with our children. So it's kind of like it's in real time, it's fresh, and we're building our curriculum as we go. We do have, there's a lot of experts that are out there that are not recognized in mainstream, but we do have a lot of great people that are so pivotal in helping us put our history together. So the white paper, I guess you can say, is a culmination of that, of having an educational tool to bring all the fallacies and the false narratives into the spotlight from the very beginning of looking at our motherland, who is an ancient old world, who is the old world, really, of the planet, right? And being the ancient old world, well, who are these, leads to the next question, and who are these real ancient old world people? Are they the people that are called Native Americans today? That doesn't necessarily match up with, documentation of antiquity that are not taught in regular so-called mainstream schools, but it's out there. It's been on the books. It's suppressed. So bringing about suppressed documentations, firsthand accounts of what explorers and other individuals and people who they saw, who they interacted with when they got here or when they interfaced with us. And it describes the same people that look like the Black and African American people that are called and reclassified as that today. So beginning with the history of America as the old world, connecting to who those Aboriginal copper-colored races of people really were in relation to who they are today, opens up the door for critical questions. And that's where the issue of the genocide and the human rights abuses against the Aboriginal copper-colored people of America comes into play. And then now it leads us to looking at the relationship between the United States government and its subsidiaries to us today. That opens up another Pandora's box as to why are we the only people in this country that have been through a myriad of racial, ethnic classifications. Like you didn't know who we were the first time when you talked to us. So we actually put living live documents of census records of members of our nation to show how the crime was committed and continues to be committed when you're looking at actual records in census records where we're reclassified again and again and again. Even looking at documents where our kinship are listed as Indians, and then when you make phone calls to make to question the documents that they have listed on Ancestry, whatever, you go back and it's gone. So they're still erasing us in real time. This is not something that just happened hundreds of years ago. This is something that is still happening in real time. So bringing all that to the forefront, now we're opening up the door and the pathway to start beginning the struggle of the so-called Black people in America, who are the actual Aboriginal people. We are actually victims of genocide. We are the victims of a Holocaust. This is something that is still going on to this day. The very fact that the United States government, even in their immigration policies, we actually pull that into the document to show how immigrants are taught about who we are. Like they're literally still putting questions and answers, questions on their statements that, still miseducating immigrants and foreigners that come into this country that we're descendants of slaves. They're still teaching that in 2023. This is still happening. Yeah. So that was the foundational intention when we as a council decided to move forward with the white paper, because someone needs to tell our story in a very tangible way that could be easily disseminated, internationally, and used as an educational piece, the wrong of this historical, academic, political fraud that is still continues in 2023 with regard to the Aboriginal copper-colored people of America.
Nice. We still have a couple of things that we need to unpack before we actually start getting into the white paper. One of them is people want to know, what is a white paper? And it's an authoritative, research-based document that presents information, expert analysis, and an organization or an author's insight into topics or solutions to a problem. And the reason why it's called a white paper is because the term originated when government papers were coded by color to indicate distribution, and the white paper designated it was for public access. So the reason why the white paper is so important is because any time that any governmental or organization or school or research, they want to move into another area, in order for them to give themselves authority in that area, they write what they call a white paper, where it gives all of the facts about a particular subject, so that people can begin to start basing what they're talking about and the information that they're presenting on in a very cohesive, professional manner. Did I get that right pretty much?
Yes, absolutely. And normally white papers, they're pretty brief documents. You know, we kind of ran into about, I think we ran into about a little bit over 40 pages. But, you know, the broad, yeah, it was about, we ran over a little bit, but because it was so much to unpack and we really wanted to, because this is just part one, right? There's more to add to this, but we just wanted to, you know, bust that Pandora's box wide open, so you can at least see all the different parts that play a role into the continuum of genocide against the Aboriginal people of America. I've actually co-wrote a white paper with Advocacy and Action, with the Prisoners Family Conference out of Texas. I have been involved with them for several years, pre-doctoral and post-doctoral. I wasn't able to do too much with them this year because of just the workload of, you know, our juridical counsel that we've taken on. It was just it was impossible for me to, you know, juggle that. But I, you know, have some history with working with the Advocacy and Action group with the Prisoner Families Conference out of Texas, and under the directorship now of Dr. Avon Johnson. And we co-wrote a white paper with that group, and that was on the mass incarceration as the human rights issue of the 21st century. So yes, you were very right about, you were correct in how you describe what a white paper is for. And it's a very good teaching tool. It's like a snapshot of a problem, of an issue that needs greater attention, that needs greater discussion, but it also needs greater action. It's like a call to action as well. So yeah, you described that perfect.
And now the other thing that I wanted to get in is the think tank that was actually behind the white paper, which is, again, you mentioned a few times, the Council of Nine, the also Ground Council, and this is all part of a system of a right of return that is representing a large number of Aboriginal Indigenous American Indians in their return back to what they came out of before they came here. And this part of it is the Coosa nation state, which you are the chief of.
Yes. Like I said before, I'm very blessed and honored to be among brothers and sisters in kinship who voluntarily come together to work for the whole of our people. So yes, the think tank behind the white paper is our Judiciary Council, which is the Council of Nine, which represents us as a juridical personality and sovereign interpreter for, you know, advocating for our rights throughout the country. So we tied, not only does the white paper, you know, the historical piece and fallacies that were, you know, tearing down those falsehoods, it also is a way of connecting to what's happening to us today. And because Coosa Nation State, as a juridical personality, has been on the ground level involved in advocacy and showing up for kinship across the United States, you know, making those important phone calls, being at the table at meetings with, you know, senators, representatives from senators' offices, congressmen and women, being in courts, being involved in the courts, sending out multiple documents, and being there to help represent our people. And this is all charitable because we do not charge for our services at all. And we have been able to actually see inside the United States judicial system from the perspective of how the genocide continues against our people firsthand, and how the system is weaponized on purpose to maintain this continuum of genocide so that the United States does not ever have to be held accountable for what continues to happen to us and continues the international fraud that these black folks that y'all got, the descendants of these people you took from Africa, when that is not true, and continuing this global fraud of defrauding us out of our heritage, so that you can continue to, rob us of land, rob us of safety and security in our own land. And we can talk, we can deep dive. We have time today. We can touch on some of the cases we have, but we've also we brought those aspects into the white paper as well to show the offices of people who we've connected with and the letters that the responses we've gotten back from some of the highest offices pertaining to, the things that are happening to us and feigning jurisdiction. Like, no one has jurisdiction to fix the problem, but yet you claim you have jurisdiction to cause us harm. That's a violation of universal law. That's a violation of the highest laws of humanity that, the United States claims it created itself out of, breaking away from the alleged tyranny of England, of Britain, with no taxation without representation. Well, guess what? We've been under forced taxation. We don't have representation truly in this country. And I know right now there's just a constitutional crisis between these factions of so-called political, being Democrats or Republicans, and that none of that has worked for us, because the United States still remains the #1 human trafficker through mass incarcerations in the world, and the foundation of that is its judicial legal weapon, the weaponization of its own legal system against to keep the Aboriginal, copper-colored races of America, Negros de Terra, who became the colored, the Negroes, the Afro-American, the Mulatto, the African-American, the Black American. Now they call us BIPOC, the Black Indigenous American, all these different names, Afro-descendants, all these different names that come up for us. But this is what it really is. So we've been able to tie in.
This is why the white paper is so important, because the white paper gets into describing a lot of the things that you're discussing. And you mentioned juridical personality. What does that actually mean?
A juridical personality is basically when so in other words, we're representing a body of people, right? A body, so-called body politic of people, as a juridical personality, because we're taking on the personality of the people that we're working on to be a juridical representation.
And that is part of the Great Grand Council, which has nations all over the continental United States, including in Hawaii, actually, and all the way up in Alaska. We also have representation in Canada. So that's what you mean by juridical personality, because you are the Grand Council, we're representing it as one state.
Right, and we're speaking specifically to a population of people, a body politic that are incurring constant indigenous human rights violations, and we are standing in the stead of this personality and bringing it out in a juridical capacity to illuminate what is happening to this body politic, to this group of people where they have no representation.
So the Great Grand Council.
We get pushed back, but who represents? Who's representing us then? So we're coming to you and we're saying this child, this family, this person has been grossly violated, unprotected in your system. Then what are you doing about it? You're not doing
and
anything about it.
That's where the Council of Nine comes in at. Is that right?
Yeah.
Out of the Great Grand Council, you have the advice of the Council of Nine, and how does that fit into everything?
The Council of Nine specifically studies, adjudicates, advocates for cases of individuals and families who come in who have been violated in some capacity within the United States. So it could be educational violations, health violations, violations through the criminal justice system, because we have a lot of that. Through the DFAC system, social services, our people through every system, we can verifiably say with the cases that we have, and it's not just in one state, two states. It is from Alaska down to Louisiana. Systematically, we are witnesses to corruption, collusion, malfeasance, misconduct, deprivation of rights, color of law. It is awful. And we see it, we witness it firsthand of what this system does to our people. And specifically, if they know you know who you are, they make it even harder for you and for us. We get threats. Sometimes we're dealing, with states who want to threaten us, oh, you're practicing law without a license, and, you don't have the right to speak up for this person. You can't file for that person. Yes, you can. In the common law, yes, you can. I mean, law is, when law was law, people in the community could just stand up, who have good standing in the community, can be witnesses, right? Can come and advocate on behalf of someone who may be falsely accused. So law does not require, what the United States system, its bar system requires for you to stand up for somebody. And that's what we do. We just literally juridical personality, sovereign servant, or advocates are just fancy words, but it's fancy words for just standing up for someone that we believe has been wrong. And we go the extra mile to do our own forensic interviews of potential victims, synthesizing documentation, making phone calls to back up supporting evidences. So we do our due diligence in taking in. We always will address the entity or individuals or persons who are named as perpetrators of the violations against the individuals and families who come to us with their petitions. So we are fair. We do our best to, to be balanced, because we always will leave that open. But, most of the time perpetrators don't think, especially when you're dealing with a state agent perpetrator, they think they're above the law. They don't have to answer when they violate people. And that's what we're finding, is that we go through the myriad of so-called remedies that is available and finding that there is no remedy. These agencies have oversight on paper and on computers and online and on these websites, but when you engage them to actually do their job, when we have verifiable evidence of wrongdoing, we don't have jurisdiction, or they're passing the buck. So it's an incredible Ponzi scheme. That's the best way we can describe it. It's a Ponzi scheme.
Just to put it into some focus, you're not only talking about just the the Council of Nine through the Great Grand Council of Nations. They represent not only on the local level, county level, state level, but also the federal level, but you also represent internationally. And you have had deep conversations with just about every association with the OAS. And could you explain what the OAS is and how the white paper was disseminated to all of the nations around the world?
Absolutely. Well, it began with our Great Decree, and that came out several years ago. The Great Decree, basically setting ourselves free. And we are decolonized.
We'll get into a show on that one.
That's where it started with that, and the follow-up was the white paper to educate organizations like the OAS, the Organization of American States, through their IACHR, which is their Intercommission for human rights is where you can. It's actually the only organization that we've come to find that can on U.S. soil that we know actually adjudicate human rights cases, because federal courts in the United States, you say the word human rights to them, it's like a deer in the headlight. They look at you like, well, they turn your human rights cases into civil rights cases. No matter how many times we say we're not dealing in that area, we're dealing with indigenous rights. So they don't really handle those cases. It's always frivolous to them. It's pretty incredible when you just think about the highest courts in the country and how they are they're not impartial at all when you bring these type of cases to their arena. But anyway, the OAS-IACHR is a commission that is supposed to hear human rights cases. They have two means of doing that. You can file a petition and or a precautionary measure when you have an emergency situation. So the white paper was also disseminated throughout the members of the OAS to educate them on who we are, so that we can be given the proper help as indigenous people. So,
and
of
the
course,
OAS, for people who don't know, the Organizations of American States, on this side of the great, whatever you want to call it, world, is all of the Americas. So you're talking about, Canada, the continental United States, Mexico, Central America, and all the way down into South America. Again, for those people that are paying attention, we all look at this as one great continent, but that's what the Organization of American States is, and they have entered into a pact as to where they're overseeing a lot of the human rights violations, which the white people gets into, and they have cases right now, more than multiple cases, directly out of the court systems from the highest judiciaries of many states in the continental United States, going into and the United States has the answer for a lot of the things. So this is one of the services internationally, because they're not only dealing things with just national issues, they're dealing with international issues, because what the white people gets into, and we're getting ready to read a little bit of that, is that we are we are indigenous, Aborigines, indigenous American Indians on occupied land. Did I state that one right?
Yes, correct. And one of the thorns in our side when dealing with the OAS is because, of course, they're funded through belligerent occupiers. So even though they do take cases against the United States and things like that, but that's a whole other conversation to get into the mechanisms. We've met with their head people that are in the Secretary's office. Our beloved woman and our chief mother, Anita, has spoken at the I think it's the 180. I hope I get it right. The 186 or the 187th general meeting that they've had about dealing with the human rights situation in the United States, and to bring out the issue that we have is not because we're slaves from Africa, but because we are the actual indigenous people, which changes the conversation. So some of the offices within the OAS have been amicable to us. Actually, we're sitting on the Summits of America. They have different think tanks, programs, and things to connect with other people within the Americas to talk about our stories and how we can help each other. And then, of course, there's the other side of it, the pushback, where we're doing our best to educate the OAS, which I believe they already know, that part of their mechanism is exhausting state remedies. There's no way to exhaust state remedies here. We know that is something we can definitely define and have the backup of evidence to show. Only thing you're going to do is get exhausted. You're not going to be able to exhaust state remedies, and they don't have anyone. We've looked at their staff. You need to have someone who's an expert that really understands how the United States legal system is used as a weapon, and the fact that the United States is the #1 human trafficker in the world through mass incarceration should be a red flag to any and all international international organizations like the OAS, like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which is another one that is, it's benign, nothing. The UN, all of these international organizations right there, then and there. But again, because of who we really are, and these organizations do know that, these heads of these organizations, they know who we are. So that's an even bigger and broader fraud that we're dealing with, that, these international organizations ignore. It's just benign neglect, because it's more profitable to hide us and to lie about us and to keep us as a suspect class of people, because it's going to upset the world.
And that's the reason why the white paper is so important, because this becomes a baseline in written form of historical evidence of who and what we are that they cannot get around. And what I want to do right now is just read. I want to start really getting into the white paper. I want to read the first beginnings of it, and then start summarizing some of the what I call table of contents as we get into that. But what it says, the white paper, American Genocide in the 21st Century, which is happening now, unfortunately, a continuum of human rights abuses against Aboriginal copper-colored races of America. And again, we got into that when we were discussing this on one of the last shows about the actual definition of the American Indian in the, I believe it's the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, when they brought out what the actual definition of the American Indian is, and that is the copper-colored races that was found here in America. So that's where that comes from. And as it says, is perpetrated by the United States, ET&AL, the White Paper Part 1. That's important as well, authored by the Council of Nine. In a brief statement, it goes into saying the United States of America was indicted on 5 counts of genocide, October 21st, 2021. Many people don't realize that. We're going to have, we'll bring Dr. Tate back to just specifically to discuss the United States being indicted and found guilty on 5 counts of genocide in 2021. International Jurist Panel of Human Rights against abuses of, get this, Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, New York, right? In a recent U.S. delegation to the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, August 22nd, 2022, this indictment was ignored by state actors who returned with an astonishment of lacking of federal coordinated human rights mechanisms. And we're going to have a whole show, if you don't mind, to come back just to discuss the 5 counts of genocide that this country was not only indicted but found guilty on. The international community, such as the United Nations and Human Rights Council, International Council Criminal Court, and the Organization of American States, remain complicit concerning the historical exploitations of belligerent occupation and the continuum of genocide experienced by the Aboriginal copper-colored peoples of the Americas in real time. That is powerful. That is powerful. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you the website where you can actually contact the school, and also where you can also contact some of the other services that the Coosa Nation State is giving out in terms of the right of return and representation. But we're also going to give you the ability to be able to read the white paper on its own merit so that you can see what it's all about, because it is powerful. It is powerful. I just want to read this one last part, which is, as the original indigenous people of America, our sovereignty, jurisdiction, and authority was never ceded to the United States by our own volition. Moors, Black European agents, so we're getting into a lot of stuff here. Of the original 13 colonies, United States Republic of the United States Corporation are interlopers who received foreign recognition from Morocco through the 1787 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. The foreign agreement had nothing to do with our ancestors, the Aborigines, American Indians of Turtle Island. Wow, that just in that little part there is a lot to unpack when you say Moors and Black Europeans of the original 13 states. Could you just elaborate just a little bit on that?
Well, that's a whole Pandora's box, because again, dealing with historical fallacy, when you say the word European, people automatically think of people, or pale skin or white. But the original Britons, the original Europeans are brown people. And there are many of our own relatives, our relations and kinship, who were also in Europe. Their family crest of indigenous, people that are our indigenous relatives that are a part of European history. It's very easy to make this a black and white issue, because that's what race-baiting mainstream media likes to keep us pigeonholed into that stereotype, so that we don't talk about real history. Quote unquote, black on black crime goes way past today's discussion when they talk about so-called inner city violence and so-called gang activity and things like that. Historically, there's a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack.
This is the reason why this is so deep, because when you get into what Dr. Tate is talking about in terms of our educational system, and we look at Florida, they're saying that they're not going to go, with whatever traditional black studies they got going on. Whatever studies they got going on here in the United States, no one, except for the very learned, know of the original black states and who actually came over here to start corporately colonizing the Americas. And that even goes into the black conquistadors, but we're not going to get into that. But.
Right, but even when I see articles like that, I automatically will email the authors our white paper, because that's just a fallacy. Good, the so-called critical race theory that certain states are making a big stink about. I said, you know what? Good, you could throw all of that mess out. Let's start telling the truth. So since you want to eliminate, but again, this is still a part of genocide, because now you're at the point you don't want to even teach about the so-called slave history. Slave history is a part of our very early story, because that's another piece that we talked about that, would need and begs to be elaborated on, is Indian slavery.
Yes.
Remember, the word slavery is only associated with brown-skinned people. Very rarely ever talk about, slavery of white people. Because people of all,
in other words,
right,
Slavic,
of all, human trafficking is human trafficking, right? And there are people of all ethnicities and racial backgrounds that have been victims of human trafficking. If you want to, replace the word slavery with the term human trafficking, that takes it into a more international perspective. But when it comes to slavery conversation in the United States of America, within America, it's always associated with the so-called black-brown face of this country. So if you want to be real with it, these so-called experts and, collegiate individuals, let's stop playing. You want to erase so-called, you don't want to teach so-called African-American studies. You want to talk about how slavery benefited people. Yeah, slavery benefited a whole lot of it. Human trafficking benefits the human trafficker, okay? Let's keep it real. But when you want to talk about eliminating and erasing certain historical aspects, let's throw it all out and let's talk about what really took place here. So when we see articles like that, we have already trained ourselves as a council. Well, we'll find out who wrote the article and send them the white paper. You want to cover that story? Here's the real story. So when you have brown things, yeah.
Yep. No, what's crazy is that since the white paper has come out, I've seen so much more stuff on YouTube about black slavery than I've ever seen before. And when you guys, when it's mentioned here in the white paper as a juridical personality, our nation state facilitates the safe passage and right return for the indigenous Aboriginal Americans by way of human rights, advocacy, charitable social services, and indigenous education, as well as trying to provide a peaceful process for decolonization, accordance with the UN resolution of 1514 and 1615, decolonization of 1960. And, as I always say on the program, that, we were prisoners of war, and the war hasn't ended, and they captured a lot of our land and forced us to work on these concentration camps, calling us slaves. And now what you're doing through this paper is putting the ground basis of how the actual Aborigines of the Americas, the indigenous American Indians, on how they can have a right of safe passage back to the system upon which they were forced out of.
Right, because as long as you keep us black, which we know doesn't have any protections or any representation, really, which is why we're always ping-pong back and forth between people like, we're a commodity. That's the truth. You're seeing it happen now with the race baiting and, pulling the puppet strings again of the so-called black community between these factions, the Democrats and Republican factions. And we're seeing it being played out right now in real time. Because as long as you keep us as a suspect class of people, it denies us the international protections that we deserve. We have rights under Geneva Convention, right? Because we are not represented by anybody here. Anybody who thinks you really have honest representation, you don't have real representation. As long as they're representing you as somebody that they know you're not. You remember the senator in Alabama that got in trouble for calling us the Aborigines? No, it was a Freudian slip, but he was telling the truth. And how many of the so-called black community got mad about that, but don't realize that term Aborigine is what is an actual real term of how we were described in antiquity, and the word Aborigines in the original United States Constitution. So because we don't know those things as a whole in the collective, and we're not taught that, we're looking at the word Aboriginally and Native and Indian. We're looking at these indigenous as, like they're like terms beneath us, because, we want to keep our so-called African pride and don't realize we are the prize of America, right?
That's right.
And when it comes to the slavery piece, I'll just read a little blurb from page 8, speaking about the slavery. So, the historical narrative of the so-called 12 million slaves that were brought to build up the so-called continental United States' claim is given without substantive empirical proof, fostering metaphorical debate on the subject, believing us to be like we're still gullible, right? And what is true and most important to note is the other slavery, which is an actual book that you can look up, the other slavery, as it connects with the 2.5 million to 5.5 million indigenous American people, Indians, that were enslaved and counted. This is in a study by Linford D. Fisher, Associate Professor of History at Brown University. And this relative history is not taught in contemporary education, and neither is this aspect of slave history relatable to today's so-called Native Americans. You don't hear Native Americans talk about they were slaves, because it's a historical truth, a false historical truth that only the black people, the brown people were made to be slaves. But Indian slavery did exist because that's our slavery. they just switched the characters, they switched the stories around, you know, they mess with the timeline, and they don't realize there is a slave aspect. There is a slavery aspect, but it was the Indian slavery. It was us. You're still talking about the same.
We got about 10 minutes left. So in the time that we have left, I want to just go through very quickly some of the chapters that we have here, like America, the Old World.
Yes, that I can tell you that was one of the most heartfelt parts that we enjoy to do, because we finally get to say, stop lying to people that America is it may have been new to some people, but America is the ancient world. Geographically, the oldest land. The term America herself, in thanking the ancestors for awakening the mother tongue within me and my DNA, it's awesome when you know what these words mean, when you know the language. So America, America, Amari, Coosa, Hanuna, all of that literally transliterates into the motherland of the breath of life that was first revealed, the first to rise out of the waters. That's what our mother's name really means. And the fact that we can bring that back into perspective, again, then you have to question, well, then who are these ancient people? And that's the beauty of that.
Yeah, and the Americas, as the archaeologists know, was the first land to pop out of any waters on this so-called earth, while they were still looking at pebbles or maybe just little fragments of land anywhere else. We were actually a full-fledged land. Now, then it gets into the Aboriginal copper-colored races of America, which we talked about a little bit, but it also talks about the critical question. What is the critical question?
All right, so the critical question, what page is that on?
The sin of genocide is no longer our burden to bear. Comes
right
yes. After that.
Okay, let me come to that. All right, so, right, it isn't. It's not our burden to bear. That we don't have to bear that burden anymore, because our ancestors are alive. The dry bones live, and we, as the descendants and the living DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid of our people and of this earth and of this land, all of these are our ancestors: the trees, the land, the soil, the wind, you know, our biological. We are all related. We are really truly connected to this land. So that would lead up to the critical question was, why did it take from 1819, you know, that's the historical date, the beginning of the so-called transatlantic slave trade theory, up until 1988, which is over 300 years, for the United States to geopolitically classify us as African American? Because we show proof positive of that by actually posting census records. You can go into your own census records. When have we been called African American? When has it been on there? Why did it take over 300 years? And we have a figure that we put in the white paper of racial reclassifications of Aboriginal copper-colored races of America based on historical revisionism and / white supremacy. And it shows that we kind of just showed these two lanes. We began in antiquity. We were described as Negros da terra. That is, in antiquity, you cannot escape that. You can't make that up. You can't pretend it didn't happen. That's who we were called. The Aboriginal people of America, were called the Negros da terra. We were called the Aboriginal race of America. We were called primitive black nations of America. We were called Aboriginal copper-colored, that key word colored, races of America. Then it was shortened to just colored people, right? We're American Indians, Indian, Indios. That has a significant meaning. It doesn't mean it was a mistake and they thought we were people from, you know, so-called the other India. The word Indios, N-D-O-S, in, D is deep. Os is the atmosphere of the universe. It meant the people of God, people who have God within. When they say the word Naga, Niji, they're talking about those who have the risen guide of the universe within you. In other words, as superficial religions teach us to worship outward, to look up in the sky waiting for someone to come down. We, as the American Indian, the Aboriginal people, the Indios, we were known as sacred people to have God, the guide of life within us, which is our law was a high law. We did fall in capacity, and that's a whole other thing to talk about, but the Guyana Shagawa, that is interpreting to the great law of peace, meant the great guiding principle of consciousness. So we knew that, and that's another piece that's added in the white paper that talks about how foreigners reacted to the great law of peace and how equality was among our people and things like that. So we were people with God within. From there, we became, reclassified 1492. Now we're American. Now we're Negro, colored, mulatto, black, Afro-American, African-American to the present. Then we have the Afro-descendants. That's another little reclassification term that's on a more international level within the UN and the OAS, where they want to classify as Afro-descendants, like an Afro-descendant. What is an Afro-descendant? Okay, anyway. BIPOC, that's the Black Indigenous people of color, which is actually mentioned in that 5 counts of genocide, because the only people that have had the type of interface with the police system and the mass incarceration, they can't give that to anybody else but us, but they called us the Black Indigenous people of color, BIPOC. And then on the other side of that, how did the American Indian become the Native American? Well, that's when the land bridge theory, that these so-called First Nations cross into North America, the out of Africa theory, putting those pieces together, you create a whole other so-called American Indian that are alleged as Asians, Mongoloid, Hindustan, Native Americans, Alaskan, that's a whole different set of people.
And that's a whole other story in itself.
A whole other conversation, but they are definitely not the people of antiquity, the Negros, the Terra. They're not those people.
You definitely got that critical question going there. And we also looked at the International Tribunal on Human Rights. We're going to have a whole nother show just based on that, of Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples genocide in the context of the U.S. policy. That goes with the same. The United States is estranged from human rights. I think we discussed that a little bit. That's going to go into that human rights thing too. But the continuum of the United States genocide. Can we get a little bit on that one? That was on page 33. The continuum of the of American genocide.
Well, we based that on, past history, but bringing it up to date. See, when we've been able to sit and meet with people within these senators and congressmen and women's offices, meeting with heads of HUD, meeting with heads of the EPA, meeting with heads of the USDA, these so-called helping agencies, right?
Yeah.
We from inside are able to see where funding does not make it to the little people. It doesn't make it really into these communities like they pretend that it does. It's so much red, blue tape, but out of the box you can send trillions of dollars outside this country, but the way so-called the immigrants or people that they're forcing into this country now, the migrations of people that they're forcing into this country now that are able to get health care, housing, jobs, and cars. The average person here and organizations here, it is so much red tape and loops and hoops that you got to jump through to get help. And it's just incredible. It's an incredible fraud. So basically,
go on to page 36, where you get the sustained oppression and the effects of genocide.
Yes.
All the things that you're discussing now, this is like an ongoing process, and how they're just being not only wiped out, but just being forgotten and putting other people who don't even belong on the land right in front of them. And so what would be the recommendations for remedy and the conclusions that you have on 37 and 43? What would be the recommendations and remedies for this?
Number one is for us to recognize each other, right? Listen to your elders who told you those stories. Go into your census record. Work on your genealogy. But along with that, come together with look out for each other like we used to. The number one remedy is for us to look out for each other. We may get pushback, and we get a lot of pushback in the work that we do as a juridical personality, but they know we're not going anywhere. Mahawahe, we walk with each and every individual and family to the best of our ability, and we unless the case is finalized and we've gone as far as we can go, we don't really leave our people. We don't leave you. We don't do that. We stick with you. We stay with you. We cry with you. We're angry with you. We're making those phone calls. We're doing our best to look out for you. It's not like we don't have 100 people on our staff either, on our council.
Yeah.
But the most important thing that we try to impart on every family, that a lot of times the families become helpers. The individuals that we help become helpers. They're looking up laws. They're learning to be self-advocates and help the next person. It's really about that. That's what made us the beautiful people that we were and that we still have the potential to be and that we are, is that even when other slaves and people were mistreated within the colonial system, they ran to us. That's in documentation. They came to us because of freedoms and the humanity and the humanity that we have as a people. We're not bloodthirsty people. Stop believing those stereotypes that we're just we don't have any family code. We don't we're late. Stop believing that mess. That's all stereotypes. I'm not saying that our communities have not suffered. Of course we suffer. When you're in a political system, our kids are being educated by people we should not be educated by. These people have taken forced jurisdiction over us. They hunt us down the street. So we have a reason to be in part while some of our communities, and sometimes we're messed up as a collective. But I'm telling you, we're beautiful people. We are a sacred people. We are a loving and kind people, and we just need to remember that and help take care of each other. Look out for each other. That is the number one remedy. Look out for one another. Show the universe and the great ancestors and the great Hawa, the great spirit, that we're still here and that we still have that love and capability in our heart as warriors of love for each other. The second part is to keep illuminating our issues. Don't shun away from who we are. Don't shun away from the word genocide and our Holocaust, because it is true. It is real. It is historical. The documentation is there at our fingertips if we want it. And to illuminate these issues and do our best to make those around us accountable for the atrocities of this continuum of this crime and call them out on it. Stop just just letting other people speak for us who don't really speak for us. They don't speak for the American Aboriginal.
With only a minute left, we're going to have to pretty much wrap it up there. But this has been great. So we're going to have you on. If you can come on maybe next week, would that be possible?
Yes. This is a critical, very important issue, very critical for us for what we're doing. Getting our status corrected and is a part of decolonization, coming out of that system and coming into our own. Absolutely.
Very beautiful. I thank you so much for your time. And as it says in the white paper, the time for American genocide has come to a complete halt and needs to stop. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Asha.